All right, welcome back. This is the part 2 of this to-do project application. In the part 1 we talked about we explored the application we intend to build, and we also designed the application. One thing I didn't remember to do in the design part was to change the font size of this output text, just so that we have something a little bit more legible. So I'm going to change this to 14, and probably we can also change this to I'm not sure now, but let's see. But eventually we'll come to this later on. Those are little things. In this video we want to code, so let's head over to the code tab. Now before we go there, a few things you want to ask yourself are: what are the things we need to do? What are the inputs we need for this application? So as you probably have noticed, this is an input, right? This is an input. And we can also say this is an input, right? Because this is also going into this application. So essentially we have like 1, 2, 3 things already that we know that we would have as input. And it will be good for us to, have a variable to keep track of whatever these inputs are here. The other thing we want to ask ourselves is, what are we storing? What do we need to store? And then finally, what do we need to output to the user? Of course, the box here, recall that we have a box here, right? That box right there would be used for output. This is also output as well. And for the submit, declare to-dos, and there are lots of event handlers here, and you'll see how all that, because there's an event handling here where we click on an item, we change that item, and then it toggles whatever box it needs to toggle here. Without too much talk, let's get to code. Here, I'm gonna hide these because we don't need that. Now the first thing we want to do is to create an empty list of variable for the to-do list, right? And let's set that to an empty list. And I'm going to write a comment here. So set initial to-do list as empty. All right. So now we're done with that, and just ignore this for a moment. It's just saying that, hey, you defined this, but you didn't call it anywhere. So eventually we'll call that. So just ignore what you see here. We also have an item, right? That's the item we're entering in right here. So let's call this item to enter in as to do. We have another input here. And let's call that var task drop down index, right? And this here would be the index of the choice between, and the choice is going to be between add, delete. I don't want it to keep scrolling to the other line, so I'm just going to take these up. I'll cut this and I'll take this up just above this line. So the index of a choice between add, delete, and insert to do. All right. And what this just means is that we want to keep track of the index. When a person chooses here, there's a property that is associated with this element called index. So we want to keep track of the index and know what they chose here. And that's what this is for. And it will make more sense when we code this up. So the other thing we want to do is to say item index value. Value. And this would be the value entered, the value they enter into the item number box. item number box. Again, this is going beyond the line, so I will just copy this and paste it over above here. All right, so now we have all those 4 things set. All right, this is the list initially set to empty because initially we don't have anything we want to do, right? Until we start adding items to it, or we start removing items, and so on and so forth. If we go ahead and run this application now, notice that it appears like it's similar. However, this is the final application. Now notice that in this application, for the add to do, if we go to the delete to do, the insert to do, the add to do, notice that we only have this element shown here, right? But this other element isn't showing. And this is the first element. So if we go back to our code right here, you notice that this is the first element, right? That is chosen for us. So what that means is that initially when this screen is loaded, we want to hide this text box, right? Initially when this screen is loaded, when the application is loaded, when we start the application, when we run the application, whatever English you want to use for that, this is hidden. So let's go ahead and do that. Now the way to do that, and let me just quickly show you this. So if I click on this, this text input element, and I scroll down all the way, you'll notice we have a property called hidden. Now, if I click on this hidden, you notice that it's grayed out, more like it's not going to show, right? And if I toggle it again, you notice that it's now enabled, so we can do something with it. And this is what we would leverage in the code. And we'll just set this property and we'll hide it based on this property. So let me show you how to do that. The way to hide or to change any property of any element is by using this set property. Before that, let me just say we want to initially hide the item number text box. All right. And the reason we want to do that is because it's not needed for the to do. So let's say, since we don't need it for adding to do items. All right, so set property is what we use to do that. And in set property, we have 3 different arguments. The first is the input label. The ID of the element. So what's the ID of this element, this particular element? The ID of that element is, let's see if we can get it based on what we, since we've already renamed our element here, I believe it's to do index input here, to do index input, and comma. The next thing here would be to look for this hidden property, hidden. And just in case you don't know, you can also scroll all the way once you get this IntelliSense, choose hidden, and then you want to choose between true or false. So initially we want to hide that item. We want to hide this item, what item number what? We want to hide that. So we want to say that initially it's hidden. And so hidden is set to true. So far, let's start this application and let's see if this gets hidden. And so if we run this application now, notice that we can see it here, right? And that means that it's hidden for us. And so this is how to this is how to access the property of any item, any element you see here. And what have we done so far? We've been able to, change or to set the initial state of that text box. Eventually, we need to bring it back or restore it when we, change this to do, we want to see that item. And that will probably tell you what we need to do, right? It's just set property to do text input hidden, and we set that to false. And we'll come to that much later on. For now, what I want us to do, and let me just reset these so that we can see what we're working on. So what I want us to do now at this time would be to work on for now, we'll just work on the add to do. And we'll take this, gradually and until we're done with everything. So notice that when a person chooses add to do, right, we want to say whenever they click on this submit button, what do we want to do? We want to get the input of whatever they have here, right? We want to get that input. And we also want to get whatever the drop down is here. And we also want to get whatever the number they typed in here is. So those are the things we'll do when a person hits this submit button. For now, we will just work on this add to do and make sure that we can see the to do's added here. And let's go ahead and do that. So in order to do this, we need an event handler, right? We need an event handler for the submit button. Now for the submit button, the event handler we need, or we want to have here, is the submit, the click. So on event, I typed on event, and I look for the ID, which is this button submit. What event? I want to choose click and comma function. And I want to make sure there's a semicolon at the end of that on event. So don't put your semicolon in between the parentheses and the curly bracket. It has to be outside the entire on event block. So take note of that. All right. So the first thing we want to do, let's just simply get what's inside this text, right? And let's store it back in the item. Notice that this is what the variable is that we defined for storing such items, right? So let's say item equal to get text, because it's going to be a text, right? And we can look for to do text input. I believe to do text input. All right. So now we're done with that. What's the next thing we can do here? For now, just to keep things simple, what we want to do is we'll create another function. What this function will do is just to simply say add to do, and we want to pass in this item as an argument. So essentially we'll have a function, and just by the way, all our functions will be above all the on events. So whatever function I'm adding here would have it up here. So what does this function do? We're calling a function add to do that takes in this item as an argument. And so that will get passed into the function. And so let's have this function here. The function we want to have here is called add to do. So add to do, and we'll have item here and curly bracket. What we want to simply do here, really there's no much check we have to do here, apart from the fact that we want to make sure that they enter something, but we'll come to that later on, right? But for now, all we want to simply do in this add to do is just to append item. Remember that function? So append item to what list? Recall that we have this list created already and set to an empty string. An empty list. So we'll pass in that list here, to do list. And what's the item? The item we want to append is the item the user supplies. So we'll pass in that item here. And that's it. That's all there is to this part of adding to do. So let's see if we, because if we try to run this application now and we come here and we say develop the to do application and we hit submit button, even though it's there, you can't really see it. And this is how we know it's there, to do list. If we add that, you notice that we have this develop the to do application right there. And if we go ahead and choose something else, and notice now that we don't even have any thing to help us clear the text just yet. We'll look at all of that. If I hit submit, keep an eye here. You see the list, we now have 2 items in the list. And this is one of the beauties and one of the reasons you should use watchers at times when you're working with your application. All right, so simply put, what have we done so far? We've been able to add an item to the list, or simply put, append an item to the list. Now, we're not done with that just yet. We want that item to show here, all right? Because it does, yes, we've added the item, but we can't see it here. So for that, let's create another function. And we will call this function update to do. Update the output box. Not really box, update the output. So here we'll just say update to do. Notice that we're not passing in anything here, right? That's because we're not passing in anything. We just want to update this box to show the text that the user enters. So again, let's head back up here. I'm going to create update. I'll call this update to do, and this is just a comment, right? So nothing too fancy. We can just call this update to do. And for this, we'll create a function and call this update to do. Now you want to make sure that this name matches exactly the same name you have here. So if that's not the case, then you would run into an error. So you want to make sure that this name matches the same thing as what you have here, and that there's no argument inside, or you don't pass in any parameter. You don't have any parameter set here. All right, we have curly bracket, and after that curly bracket, we want to go ahead and define what we want to do here. So for this update to do, what we want to simply do is to set the property of this output label. We want to set the text, and we want to pass in the list using this join function. So this is how this works. Again, we're setting property. We're setting the property of the output label, I believe, output label, because that's what this element is called. And we want to set the text of that output label. We want to set the text to whatever is in to-do list. We want to join each of them, and we want them to have each to be on a new line. So what this does is that it takes each element in this to-do list. Now you recall we have two elements here, right? It takes this first one and then join. You think of joining just like we talked about concatenation, right? So it's more like saying we're concatenating these with a new line. Of course, you know that this is an escape character that stands for new line. So what that means is print the first item you see in this to-do list, and then go to a new line and print the next item if there is, and keep on doing that same thing until there are no more items in the list. I hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and let's run this application. I just stopped it and I'm going to run this application, and let's go ahead and enter to do, develop the application, submit. Now you see we have the develop the to do application here. Let me do this a little bit just so you can see, and eventually I think I'm just going to increase the font size of this one. So let me just quickly go to design, and let's see if we can just quickly change the font family to probably Trebuchet, and let's change this to 16. I'm not sure how that would render. Why not just test it out again? Let's enter develop the application, and probably this is fairly okay. All right. So let's get back to code. Now, what we're done with the first part. All right, we've been able to add an item to our to-do list. But you notice that we couldn't clear the text here, right? And that we would handle in a short moment. But for now, let's go ahead and actually, in fact, just clear this button, or this box rather. Let's clear this box once that item is submitted. The way we want to do that is, when we want the box to clear, when we hit this button submit, we want to add this element, or this item rather. We want to add this to do item to the list of to dos. And once we're done with that, we then want to clear whatever is right here. So the way to do that is, notice now that we have this add to do item. We update the to do, right? And now we can clear the boxes right here. So clear the text box, the text boxes after submitting. So how do we do this? How can we clear the text boxes after we've submitted? It's very simple. Again, what we're going to do is to work on this set property. So for set property, we want to look for to do text input, and we want to set the text to nothing, just blank, like so. And we'll do the same thing for the other one, which is the to do index input, I think. Okay, so I think I've chosen the same item twice. The other one, I believe, is to do text input. Here we go, to do text input. And we also want to change the text, and we want to set that as well to nothing. So if we reset this now and we run again, and we enter develop the to do application, we hit the submit button. Notice now that this is cleared. And this is what does the magic right here. The set property to do text input text. All right. So now that we are done with adding item, and we've also been able to clear this input, why not do the next, probably the other simple thing for us to do would be to work on these clear to-dos. And for that, we need to also create an event handler for this button right here. So let's go ahead and create an event handler for clearing the to-do. And for that, we will just click on this place, and let's go ahead and say clear the to-do output. And for this, we just want to have an on event, because this is a single thing and we won't need to call this anywhere else. So there's really no need for us to have a separate function to do this. We can just do this right here in this box. And we want to look for this button clear to dos, and the event will be click, and we want to have function and parentheses and curly bracket. And again, like I said, you have to include a semicolon, add a semicolon right here, but after the parentheses. All right, so what we want to do here, to clear the to-do, all we want to do is now to set the to-do list to empty, just as we did here. So all we just need to do there is just to say to-do list is equal to empty. And that means that we are emptying everything that is in that to do. We're saying, hey, we're clearing everything. We don't want anything in that list anymore. And that's just what this simply means. So whenever you do something like this, initially we're setting it, but then even now more so, if you do it after you've written any part of your code, what that then means is that you're assigning an empty list to this variable right here. And so that clears everything. Now, how would we know that this is cleared? Again, we just want to set that property. We want to set the property of the output label. So the output label, that's where our output is. We want to set the text to to-do list dot join, and this time around we just want to join. We're not joining with a new line because we know there's really nothing in this list, right? All right, so let's go ahead and let's try this out. I'm going to reset this application again, and I'm going to rerun it again. So let's add a couple of items, develop and set up a hosting plan. And now you see it here. Trace code, submit. You see that here as well. And I think I'll leave this just for now. What else? So now we're done with all of that. Let's see if our clear to-dos work, and indeed the to-do list is clear. And also look at the watchers right here. You notice that there's really nothing. There's nothing here. The list is now empty. It's 0. All right. The next thing we want to do now is to focus. Of course, we're still here. Let's still do this. So notice that if a person tries to submit nothing, right, you notice we have a list of 1, right? And then they were able to submit something that is really empty. We don't want that to happen. And that's the reason for this element we had here, which we can't see now, but we will see very, very soon. So now we want to stop this user if they try to hit the submit button on something that doesn't really exist. So they didn't type in anything, but then they want to continue. We want to set this box, and we want to say, hey, you can't do that. Sorry. So the way we would go about this is by looking at this part and saying, okay, before we even, let's get back into this place. Before we even add an item, we want to check if they entered anything, right? So we want to check if the item, that's the get text, if the item has something. So the only time we want to do anything is if the item has something in it, right? So if the item is not equal to, if it's not empty, right, then we want to add to do. We'll still change this part of the code up, and we'll change that to just probably the next thing we'll do. Otherwise, we want to set the property of this box right here. So let's go ahead and do that and say set property. And I believe that property is error message label. And we want to set that property, the text property. And we want to say, please enter the item you wish to. And I'm going to put this on a new line just so I'm going to escape. I want to put this on a new line. Otherwise, I have to create a variable for it. But I'll keep this on a new line. So here, and I would change this to, I'll have an asterisk there. Please enter the item, and I spelled that wrongly. Enter the item you wish to add, and semicolon after this. So now let's see if this works. The only time they are able to add an item is if the item is not blank. So if it is not blank, if it's not empty, as you could tell from this place, if it's not blank, then we want them to add that. We want to add that particular item. Let's reset this and let's rerun it again. And when we try to hit the button submit, now you notice we have this, please enter the item you wish to add up here. However, when they enter something and we hit the button submit, notice that we now have the develop the to-do application, but this is still there, right? And we'll handle this in just a moment. This we would handle by saying when a person now starts typing here, we want to get rid of this error here. So once they've gotten this error and once they've started typing something in here, we want to get rid of this error. Let's go ahead and code that up now. In order to do this, what we need is to set, of course, to have an event handler. The event handler would have, in this case, would be key up. So let's see how that works. If you look at this element right here, we have different kinds of events that we can, have on them. So if I do this, we have different events that we can associate with this particular element. So let's get back to code. And since this is an event, I'll just have it right here. And I want to say display an error message, on a label or on the label if user input is invalid. All right, that's what we want to do right there. We want to display that error message. So again, we'll need an on event. The event handler will need this element is the to do text input. I believe it's the to do text input. This is the to do text input. This other one is the to do index. So that's the difference between the two of them. And you see why we call that index very soon. So the event handler that we would use in this case is key up. And what key up means is that once there is a keyboard, a key on the keyboard that is up, then we want this to happen. So think of it like a person pressing something and then releasing it. This is what we want to happen. So we're choosing that key up, and let's have a function right here. Function. And now, of course, we should not forget our semicolon here. So now we can say that we want to get the item, right? We want to get the item. So let's get the item here, get text. And we want to get that item of the to-do index, to-do text input, all right? And please be cautious when you're doing this, because this is text input. So you want to make sure that it's also text input you're also getting here. And we want to check if that item is equal to blank. So if there's nothing there, then we want to set the property to what we had before. And we want to tell them, hey, please enter the item you wish to add. So let's just copy this part of the code and let's paste that right here. And otherwise, and this is not the best of designs, right? But again, I just want to keep this as simple as possible. The most important thing is for you to understand how this entire thing works, just so you can explore how to add item, how to insert, how to remove, and all of that. So let's see. Now, if the item is not, and the person starts pressing a key on the keyboard, and once the person presses a key on the keyboard, we want to set that keyboard, the text input, we want to set the text property, we want to set that to nothing. And that just means we're also clearing whatever was here before. So why not, let's go ahead and let's test this application. Let's see if it works. That's the only way we'll know if we're still on track. So we're running this, we click this button and we see this, please enter the item you wish to add. And we come here, once we start typing, does that change anything? Notice that no, it's not really changing anything, right? It's instead going back. So let's see what the problem is. here we are getting the text, right? Let's for a moment comment this out. And I'm going to reset this again, rerun this, and now if I do this, notice that nothing is actually changing, and that's because let's in fact just have this item added here as well. And we see that there's nothing in item. Item, it's undefined. So how can we do this? Now, eventually, we'll come back to this, but for now, how do we resolve this problem? So let's try to really debug this, and let's see what's happening here. When we press the key up, we want to get the text from the to-do input. If the item is this, we want to set the property of the text to this. Otherwise, we want to set the property to this. Let's go ahead and at the moment, let's look at the part of the code where we have these. And let's get rid of these for a moment. And we'll come to this later on. If we try to hit submit now, notice that we don't see anything. And this should help us to show that thing right there. So I'm running again, and now we see something. However, when we try to do this, we see D, right? But it doesn't clear this, and it doesn't allow us to enter anything anymore. So let's see what's happening right here. So notice, and this is why I said you have to be careful. This is the mistake here, and this is where debugging also comes in handy. We were supposed to set this property, right? But did you notice what we set here on line 56? So what we're saying is each time a person enters in anything in this to do text input, clear it up. And that's exactly what's happening. So the computer will always work the way you want it to work. And you as the developer, you as the programmer, you are the one who really sets the tone as to what you want the computer to do. So let's correct this. The correct thing we want to do here is what we wanted to set to blank is this error message label. So let's go ahead and copy that, and let's paste that right here. So now I believe that this program should work correctly. And if we go ahead and run this again and we hit submit and let's start typing, you notice now that we can type now, and that is gone. And if you don't have anything there, you notice that it tells you please enter the item you wish to add. If you press something again, it clears that off again. So now you've been able to see how to toggle you've seen another event handler, the key up. All right, so let's go ahead and do the same thing for this other button here that we can't see just yet, and we'll come to that just in a moment. But for now, let's go ahead and do the same thing for the second text input. So I'm going to reset this just so you understand what I mean. So for this as well, we want to do this exact same thing. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to copy this code right here, because the only thing that changes now is just this element. So I believe this is to do, let me get the name correctly, to do index input. To do index input. And we have to change that here as well to do index input. So I can just copy this and paste it here. And where else do we need to do anything? I think that's all we need here. But this time around, the prompt is different, right? For this one, we're entering an item. For this other one, we are entering a number. So we want to say, please enter the item number of the item. And I think that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what we'll do here. And otherwise, we set the error message to nothing. All right, so what have we done so far? We've been able to handle the inputs. So now we know that the add to do works just fine. All right. So far, so good. Let's run our application and let's test this. When we hit submit button, we get this error, right? And we can't do anything unless we enter something in here. And once we're able to enter something in here, we hit submit. We see that develop to do application, set up a hosting plan that appends that item, and trace code. So we submit that appends the item. And if we hit this button, clear to dos, and that also clears the to do. Now, as you probably have noticed, the only two things we have left is this delete to do and insert to do. So let's go ahead and let's see how we can do all that. All right, so things are getting a little bit more complex now, right? But again, most of the applications you see, however large they might be, it's just taking this application and, you know, just tearing it apart into different pieces and trying to solve those little chunks and then bringing everything together. That's essentially what we're doing, right? So like I said, we've not done anything on these other things. So let's go ahead now and let's work on toggling the text boxes based on the user choice. So if a person clicks on this add to do, we want this box to show. If they click on this delete to do, the only button we want to show, the only box we want to show is this box right here, which we can't see at the moment. All right. And if they click on insert to do, we want these two boxes to show. So where do we do that? Again, we'll also go to here would be an on event on this task drop down. So let's go ahead and create another event handler for the task drop down. So let's say toggle text boxes, toggle the text boxes based on the user choice. All right, so now we'll again have on event. In this on event, we want to choose the task drop down. And the event here would be change. So what that means is that whenever a user picks something and changes that item, this is what we want to do. So function, and right here, semicolon. And don't forget that. So let me explain this a bit. The event handler for this drop down works in such a way that whenever we change anything, you notice now that we've changed this item, right? This event gets called. So just so you understand what I mean, let's just log, let's just use the console.log here, just temporarily. And let's say user changed, user choice changed, user choice changed. Right, and we'll keep an eye on this part where we have this console here. So I'm going to reset this application. I'm going to rerun it again. Now the only thing we want to do now is just to notice if we have delete. Now you notice we have user choice changed. I cleared that again. I've cleared that, and let's go to add to do. You can see user choice changed. And if I come here, I click on the add to do, because it did not change, right? So it's not detecting any changes. But now if I click on insert to do, you notice user choice changed. I cleared that, I'm clearing this just so you can understand what's happening here. And you won't think, if I click on this insert to do, you won't see anything here until I change this item. So if I change that again, you see user choice changed. I hope that's clear now. I hope what this does is clear to you. So let's go ahead and code this up. Let's see. We need to know what the choice is, right? Now there is a property, and let me just quickly show you that real quick. There's a property on this element called So let's go to the property here. There's a property called index, and that's the property we'll change. The index starts at 0. So the first item has an index 0. So as you could tell here, the second item, which is this delete to do, has an index of 1. And that's how we will code this up. So let's go ahead and do this. So one thing we want to do first is to have a variable for the choice index. That would help us keep track of the index. So let me just have this here and say get the index of a choice. And the drop down. Okay. From the drop down. All right. So var choice index equal to, we'll do get property. In get property, we'll have task drop down, and the event, what we want to, the property we want to look for would be the index, I believe. Let's see, index right there. All right. So index. That's all we need. So we want to get the property of that index, and it will always return an integer. Of course, as you saw, starting at 0, right? So it means the add to do is 0. So we would say that if the choice index is equal to 0, right? What do we want to do? We want to set, again, we are setting property. So this time around, we'll set the property to hide this item, right? So let's look for the text to do index input. And we want to look for that property called hidden. So hidden, and we want to set that to true. We want to hide this if the user chooses add to do. Now, we want to do the same thing, but this time around, we want to look for to do text input. And we want to set the hidden property to false, because we want to show that. We want to make sure that this is shown when the user chooses add to do. Now, what would happen is we want to say else. So if it's not the first choice, then we want to set the property. So again, I don't need to invent the wheel. I'm just going to copy these and paste it here. And I just want to do the opposite. So this will be false and this will be true. And what that means is that if it's not adding any other choice, we want to hide this one and we want to show this one. Now, but you notice that this is still not working correctly. So if I run this program just for a moment, let's run this program. If we choose delete to do, notice now that we see this text box, right? But we don't see this one, and that's correct. However, for insert to do, we need both boxes to show up, right? So let's go ahead and just say, well, we could do that right here. We could have done that right here, where we just say else, and then we have a nested statement. And maybe we should even do that actually. So if otherwise, let's say if the choice index, if choice index is equal to 2, that's the only time we want to show the other box. So again, just to start, we can take this and move that right up here. And what this means is that if this is not true, this should happen. So we want to set this to false, which is the text index input. Otherwise, we want to set the text input, which is this one here. We want to hide that, and we want to show this one. But if the choice index is 2, we want to show this one actually. We don't want to hide this one. All right? We don't want to hide this one. if that condition was true. So here we can have this. And what this means is that now we check, and we're also checking within this else statement. We're checking if the choice index is 2. And there's a better way we can do this, right? But I don't, again, like I said, I don't want to complicate things. I'm just looking for what's easy for you to understand. And hopefully this makes sense. But if this doesn't really align with your thinking, just go ahead and try whatever you think works out. But eventually, this is the goal. Let me show you the goal right here. We run this application, we choose insert, and as you can see, we don't see that happen, right? You choose delete, this happens. So we need to move this line here. We need to move that line outside. And what this means is, like I said, there's a better way to do this. I'm just trying to keep things pretty simple. So we want to check for this, and we want to make sure that this is hidden is equal to false. Should actually be false right there. So let's go ahead and do this. Hidden should be false. We want to make sure that that's shown. And let's reset. Let's run again. And let's choose delete to do. That toggles this button. And let's choose insert. And now you see both boxes are shown. If we choose add to do, it only shows this one. So this works correctly. However, let me show you another way to write this. We can also take this if statement and bring it out here. It does the same thing. So if we run this sequentially, this is more like saying, okay, if choice index is this, we want to hide the index input, which is this one, and we want to make this visible. If it is not, then we want to make this hidden and make this one visible. And then once we're done with this if else block, we come to the next line and we see another if block. And that if block says if the choice index is 2, then we want to set this property hidden to false. So this still works as well. So whichever one you choose to go with just works fine. And even if you choose to do what you think, do it the way you think. But yeah, this is what I wanted us to achieve, and now we're done with this part of the code. Let's go to the next thing where we begin now to really implement the delete to do. At least now we have this running, so I think we're almost there. Let's hang on with me a little bit and we'll be done pretty soon. I know this is a very lengthy one, but again, I had to take some time to explain just so you understand it. All right, let's try to wrap things up now. So I think so far we're almost there, but we still have probably just a little bit more to do. If we hit this submit button, and let's look for that event, which is the button submit right here. Now this is where we'll spend most of the time now, because we need to validate the input and we need to make the decision based on whatever choice is selected here. And so because for that, we want to create some variables right here. One of the variables we'll create is this item. We've already done that before when we had this add to do item, right? But as you probably have noticed, for delete to do, we will need the item number, not this one right here. So because of that, and everything is going to take place right here in this button submit. So let's go ahead and add another variable here, which we'll call item index value. And let's set that to get number. Yeah, because we're expecting to see a number here. And we'll do get number and to do index input. And just in case you're wondering, I believe we have this item index value up there. The value they enter into the item number box. All right, so the other thing we want to do is to also have another thing here, drop down index. And this will be, we want to get the property, And the property we want to get now would be the index of this. And I believe we did that just not too long. So task drop down, and the property we are looking for is that index. All right, so now that we've done this, let's go ahead and let's validate input here. So let's validate user input. So we want to check if the task drop down index is equal to 0. That's if it is add to do, or if the task drop down index is equal to 2. If it's 0 or if it's equal to 2, and if the item, so let me just move these to another line, and the item is equal to nothing. And what this means is that, so let's say it's either add to do or it's insert to do, right? The add to do is index 0, the insert to do is index 2. And let's say it's either choice, and they don't enter anything here. What do we want to do? Then we want to display a message here, right? And tell them, hey, you didn't enter the item you wish to add. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, but here is a little bit, here is something I want you to take note of. So when working with these logical operators, you have to be careful how you write out your expression. So it turns out that if this condition is not true, or if this condition is true, if this condition is true, it's not even going to go to this part. So eventually this is going to be wrong. The logic here is that we want to first check. So think of it like this. We want to check, the first thing we want to check is if this task index is 0 or it is 2. That's the first thing we want to check. And once we're done checking that, it's going to return 1 for us, right? It could either be true or false. So if this is true, then, or this is true, of course, both of them can be true. It has to be one of them, right? Because we have just one choice at a time. So you can either choose the add to do or insert to do. It has to be one of them. So if this condition is true, then and only then we want to check if the item is also empty. And because of time, I won't try this out, but I want you to experiment with this. Get rid of this parenthesis and observe what happens when you run your application, and let me know in the comment section. All right, so now we would go ahead and here we would say we want to set property again. So I'll just copy that. And as you probably have noticed by now, there's a lot of duplication of code, but I will not do any refactoring anymore because I don't want to complicate things. But you can go ahead and try this out. Try to refactor in such a way that we can only have, as you could tell, we're copying the set property too much. And we can have a function that, you know, we can just pass out and say, okay, just do this. But again, like I said, I don't want to complicate things. I just want to keep this very simple as possible, as simple as I can try to do. So what do we have to do here? Please enter the item you wish to add, right? That's what goes in here. Now we want to check if that's, but this time around, we want to see else if. Now, you notice that if it's the add to do, right? So let's say this condition is not, this condition scaled through. So we didn't hit any point here. This returned false. We would have to check. If this returned false, it means that this is either this or it's this, and they entered something into the item text. And if that's the case, we want to then check if it's 0. So if task drop down index. If that's 0, what do we want to do here? We want to then add that item. So now I'm just going to have this add item to do list. And this is what I'm going to do for all the others, just so we check to see if this is working for now. So I'm going to comment out this part of the code just for now. All right, so what have we done here? This condition or this condition is true, okay, and this condition is also true, then this is true, right? Otherwise it's false. And if it's false, we're saying that, okay, it means that the user has entered something in the item box, which is this box right here. And so we're now saying, okay, do whatever. So let's check if they've entered something into the item box. Let's check if the drop down index, if it's 0, what we want to do is to add item, right? Because that's the 0 index. That's the first element, which of course is index 0. So the next thing we do here, we want to check as well. So else if, we want to check if the task drop down, again, the same principle, 2 parentheses, we want to check if task drop down is equal to 1. Pardon me, I believe it's drop down index is equal to 1. Or, wonder did I type that out? Okay, task drop down index is equal to 2, and I'm going to bring that down just so you don't get confused. I'll bring down the second part, or let me just bring this entire thing down. So bring this one down. Hopefully that doesn't get you confused though. All right, and we want to check this time around. We're not checking to see if the text is blank. Right? In this case, we're expecting a number, right? We're expecting a number here, not a text. And so to check if the user input a number, if the input is a number, we have a function called isNaN. So isNaN is, just think of it like saying it's not a number. So if what they entered in is not a number, and I believe we stored that in item index value, so let me just copy that and paste that here. And what we're saying is that, hey, you entered something maybe, but what you entered is not a number. So you could enter E, that's not a number, right? So we want to make sure that they also enter a valid input. So we check if it's a number, or if it's, in this case, we're checking what we did here on this line 36 is similar to what we did here. The only difference being that for item equal to a blank quote is because this is a text. However, this is a get number. So recall that we use get number for this. So look at this right here, right? We have get number, not get text. So for get number, the way to validate the input would be to use this function called isNaN. And isNaN just means it's not a number. So just a way to say it's not a number. All right, so what do we want to do? Again, I'm just going to copy this set property and paste that right here. Like I said, this is one thing you can use for your own exercise, just to make sure you're also working on something. So please enter the item number of the item, or I mean, let's just say please enter the item number. This is just pretty fine. Maybe just to stay consistent with the previous app, let's say please enter the item number of the item. And here we want to check else if the task drop down index, I believe, if that is equal to 1. And by task drop down index, we just mean this drop down, right? If it's 1 is delete. So let me run this application and let me toggle here. This is 1. This is index 0. This is index 1. This is index 2. So all these conditions you see us right here, the task drop down index equal to 1 is corresponding to these things you see here. So this is task drop down index 0. This is task drop down index equal to 1. This is task drop down index equal to 2. So I hope that makes it clearer now. So we want to check if it is 1. What is 1? What happens in 1? It means, of course, now that there's no error, right? Because we've already handled the error here. And once it gets to this part, we know that there's no error. So if there's no error, let's go ahead and just say, okay, this is where we want to delete to do. Eventually, we'll write a method to do, a function to do this. But for now, I'm just using this console.log to just more like a placeholder. And finally, I believe the last thing we do now is to check the task drop down index. And if that is equal to 2, what we want to do is to insert item. So again, I'm just going to use a placeholder console.log and say insert to do item. All right, eventually I'm going to get rid of this and would write a function to handle all of that. I believe we already have a function for this one, so we'll add that just shortly. All right, so let's go ahead and just quickly test this application, and let's try to add to do. If we hit submit, we can do that. If we try to hit delete, we see this, and let's say we enter in nothing. There's nothing to delete actually, so we can't handle that just yet, right? But let's hit submit, and you can see delete to do, right? And let's try to insert. And we try to enter something here, and we enter the item number 1, and we try to hit submit, and you see we have insert to do item. And how about add to do? If we had something here and we submit, you can see add item to do list. So now we know that these conditions are working correctly, right? Based on whatever user choice, whatever choice the user makes, based on that input, we display the text boxes here. So let's go ahead now and write the function out. All right, so for the add to do, what we have to do now is to, of course, we can now get rid of this console.log. We don't need it. We just use it as a placeholder. We've already written this function, right? So let's just copy that. And I believe we can now get rid of this entire thing here. And let's go ahead and drop that here. And we'll also look for the delete to do. And for delete to do, it turns out that we need just one thing, right? If you toggle this box, notice that we only have one input. And that just means that for the delete to do, we only need one argument to pass in. We'll call that delete to do. We don't have it just yet. We'll create it just in a moment. And we want to get the item index value. And finally, we'll also replace this with a function, and we'll call that function insert to do, and what item we want to insert and what's the item index value. So in case you're wondering where this is coming from, the insert to do, notice that if you hit the insert to do, we have two things we are passing in, right? One for the item you want to insert, and the other for the what's the index, or in this case we're asking them for the item number, right? So if the first item is the item number 1, the second item is the item number 2, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and write out these functions. Again, like I said, the functions will be up here. So let's scroll up and let's write the functions here. So now we would write this function. Let's start with the insert to do. And let's call this insert an item in the to-do list. And so for this, we need the index and item. All right, so let's go ahead and write that function out. Function, I believe it's insert to do item. No, I think it's insert to do. So let me confirm that again. Right here. Okay, insert to do. So we would have two parameters. One would be the item itself, and the other would be the item index value. All right, so in order to insert an item, we need to check for two things. So one thing is that we don't want to add an item in a number that doesn't exist. So for instance, if you have a negative value, if the user says, okay, I want to add an item in a -1, there's really no place like that, right? And so these are things we want to check and make sure that the user is entering something correctly. The other thing we want to check is that, hey, if the user says, I want to enter in an item to, say, for instance, we have like 2 elements, or let's add a to do here just so I can better demonstrate. Okay, I think I haven't added that just yet. All right. So let's say we have 2 to do items, right? If the user says, I want to insert on the third one, that's not possible, right? Because we don't have up to 3 elements here. So those are things we want to handle. To handle the first part, and again, we'll write these conditions together. So the condition will be, we want to check if the to-do list and the length of the to-do list, of course, you know the length of the to-do list is the number of elements you have there. If that is greater than or equal to the item index value, then that's an invalid input, right? And the reason we said greater than or equal to is because, again, we're dealing with, we're not asking them for index. We're asking them for the particular item number, right? So 2 different things. If the question is for us to ask them for index, then we'll write this differently, right? But we're asking them for the element number, so the item number. So item number 1, item number 2. So essentially we are saying that they can't have item number 0, right? That's what this just means, because item number starts at 1. And that's what we'll handle in this next part, where we say, or we want to check if the item index value, if that is less than 1. And if that's less than 1, if that condition is true, then we want to insert item. And we want to insert that into do list and item index value -1. And finally, we type in this item here. So let's look at this again. If the length is greater than what we have here, all right, let's make a minor modification here. I noticed that if we do this, we're checking if 5 is greater than or equal to, so say for instance they say 4. We're checking if that condition is true, and right, it should be and right here, and we want to check if that value they entered in is greater than or equal to 1, right? If that's the case, then we want to be able to insert their item, right? And this is where I want you to pay attention to, because, and this is the reason for this particular condition right here. We want to make sure that they don't enter anything lesser than 1. And that's because if at this point here, you notice that when we use this insert item function, we are passing in the index here. The index is the second thing. But if you notice now, we're not asking them for index, right? We're asking them for the item number. So the first item number for them would be 1, right? For us as programmers would be insert item at index 0, right? And that's the reason for this -1. So in case you're wondering Why did we use this -1? It's simply because for them, when we say we're working on insert, when we say insert, we're asking them for the particular item number, right? We're not asking them for the index of the item, right? We're asking them, is this the first item? Is this the second item? Is it the third item? So, and they simply enter, okay, it's the first item. So I want to add it as the first item. So I want to insert it. I want to make it to be the first item. So that's what they do. But for us as programmers now, or as developers, this is what we do. We now come here and say we work based on the index, not based on the item number. And that's the reason we're subtracting 1, because the item number is, the index is 1 less than the item number. Hopefully this makes sense. But in insert item, we don't work with the item number, we work with the indexes. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's say else. And I forgot a semicolon here, so I just added that. Once we've done that, let's go ahead and say var message. And we're doing this because we want to have a dynamic thing. Let's set that to an empty string for now. And we want to check if the to-do list dot length, if that is equal to 1, then we want to make the message to be equal to please enter 1 in the item number field. And you'll see why we're doing this shortly. Okay, otherwise we want the message to be something else. So let me just copy this since it's almost similar. So, but this time around we say please enter a number between 1 and, here I'm going to concatenate, because I want to concatenate that with the to-do list dot length. And just so you can see what I'm typing, I'm going to break this line up again. And there's a typo here, dot length. All right. So we're done with that. And let me just concatenate this again, just so I stay consistent. So we can stay consistent with the exclamation points. All right, we're done with that. The next thing we want to do now is to set the property of this. So if this message, we want to set that property, and what this means is that the item index, this condition was not true, so they were not able to insert the item. We want to set property again of that label. So I'm just going to look for this one. I'm going to copy that set property of error message. So you want to look for the one that says error message label. Just pick any of them. And the message here would be, oops, can't insert item. And now we'll just add this message with it. Message. And that message comes from whatever the output here is. So depending on whether the length is 1, if the length is 1, the message they'll get is please enter 1 in the item number field. If the number is not 1, then what they get is please enter a number between 1 and whatever the length of that list is. All right, and we're done with insert item. So let me just quickly check. And I believe we can actually reset, and let's rerun this application again, and we should be good to go now up until set up a hosting. And let's say we want to insert to do. We want to insert that on the first item, and what we want to say is trace code, and now you see trace codes. All right. So let's go ahead and let's work on this delete to do, and that would be the final thing. I know this is a very lengthy video, but hopefully this helps you to understand how all these pieces come together and how you think of your own application and think through the way to solve problems on your own. So let's go ahead and let's write this other function. The function we want to write now is delete to do, and we're passing the item number. So why are we passing in just one thing? Because we're accepting just one thing, right? So we don't need two things like the insert item. So back here, we'll also check, we'll have to check this time around if item number exists, right? The same thing. And again, these are things you can actually put in another function. So for instance, you notice I'm about to do exact same thing I did right here. So this would be a good use case for, you know, putting those kind of things in function. But again, like I said, I wanted to keep this as simple as possible, just not to overcomplicate things. So I'm just going to copy these because it's pretty much about the same thing. I'm going to copy this part of the code, and I'm going to paste it right here. And this time around, we're not inserting, we are removing. So the function to delete or to remove an item is to remove item. But this time around, we don't need the item itself. So we just get rid of that part of the code. All right. So item number is defined, but it's not yet called. Okay, we'll do that. So what have we done now? We've checked again to see if the user can actually enter, if what they entered is correct. And if it is correct, we remove that item based on their input from the list. All right. Otherwise, what do we want to do? Again, we want to set property now, and we want to set that property. So again, I'm just going to copy these. I'm going to copy these. I'm going to paste it right here. And if everything seems confusing now, just take a deep breath, take some time off, and come back again to it. You'll probably understand. So that item number, that's the message we want to display, does not exist. And this time around, we're not doing anything. And we can just say enter a valid item. Now, because we are going to another line, I will just have this plus, and we don't need this message this time around. I'm just concatenating that with whatever we have here. So enter a valid item number or add to do items. All right, so now I think we're almost there. One thing we need to do is to change this item number here. Now it's no longer item index value. We're changing this to item number because that's what we called it here. So we can actually call it anything, but whatever we use here has to be what we also use within that function. So if we call it item num, then we have to use this item num here in all these three places. But I think it's okay to call it item number. All right. So I think we're done. I think this is actually it. This is what we want to do, and now we can go ahead and test our application. I believe that we're done. This is the end of it. So let's see if everything works correctly. If we go ahead and run this application again, and we try to add to do, we see please enter an item. And let's say we enter an item and say prepare slides for work, and I hit submit. I see that. And let's say develop to do application, and let's say trace codes, submit, and let's choose delete to do, and let's try to submit. We see please enter the item number of the item. And so let's say we enter 6, for instance. We know that that doesn't exist, and we see that item number does not exist. Enter a valid item number. And you probably noticed that we have this item cut off here. We can actually fix that in this design. Let's move this up a little bit, and you may not really see this, but I see it just by looking at this screen very more closely. And now let's go ahead and run this application again. Add a couple of to-dos. This, set up a hosting plan, trace code, and what else? All right, let's stop there. So if we go over to delete to do, we don't enter anything there. We see please enter an item number. If we enter an item number that doesn't exist because we don't have up to 6 items here, right? And if we try to hit submit, we see that item number does not exist. Enter a valid item number or add to do items. And so let's say we enter in something valid. This is the third item, right? So we want to delete trace codes and we hit submit. Now trace code is gone. And let's say we want to insert a to-do item. We hit submit. It asks us enter the item you wish to add. And let's say we supplied the item number 5 and we didn't supply the other one. We see please enter the item you wish to add. And let's say we now add 4 to it. Eventually I'm going to delete that. But let's say we intentionally want to break this application and we add 6. Notice we cannot insert into 6 because there's really no we don't have up to 6 items here. So if we try to do this, you say, oops, can't insert item. Please enter a number between 1 and 2. And that's because we can only insert between 1 and 2, right? So if we go ahead and say 2, and that means we want to insert this element on the second part, as the second item. So if we go to trace codes and we hit submit, trace code should be the second thing right here. So now you see that. And this is it. That's it. We're done. And congratulations if you've followed along with this up to this point. You've really done an amazing thing. And thank you. I hope I haven't wasted your time, and I hope you're able to understand. If there's something that you don't understand, feel free to pause the video, try to understand that just pick a part of this application and try to understand what really goes on underneath the hood, and that's going to really help you. So I hope this was helpful, and hopefully I'm going to break this down so this video doesn't feel too lengthy and you can get value for it. Thank you for taking your time to watch this, and I'll see you in another time again, and we'll see how we can build something else. Finally, we're done. We're exiting. Let's clear the to-dos. We're done for the day. Thank you, and have a great time. Bye.